So I want you to just picture a live television broadcast.
Yeah.
And not the polished, brightly lit news desk you're probably used to seeing.
Right. Definitely not that.
Yeah. Imagine a shaky, chaotic feed, right?
Mhm.
Captured by a local news stringer whose camera is just bouncing on their shoulder in the dark.
Oh, man. Those feeds are always so visceral.
Exactly. And the air is thick. It's that heavy, oppressive Florida swamp humidity that just seems to, like, swallow the sound.
Mm-hmm.
Harsh industrial floodlights are slicing through the darkness, painting this dense tree line in this ghostly, overexposed white. And then a line of armored federal vehicles slowly crawls forward out of the shadows.
Just a terrifying image.
It really is. And there's a battled, sun-faded pickup truck parked directly in their path. It's basically a rusted monument to someone's daily life. And one of the armored tanks doesn't even pause. It just rolls right over it.
Oh.
You can hear the horrific mechanical groan of the metal treads, the sickening crunch of the truck's chassis flattening out into the mud. You can smell the diesel exhaust, the acrid smoke.
Yeah, you can really picture it.
And in the background, underneath the roar of the engines, if you listen very closely, you can hear children crying.
It is a profoundly visceral, terrifying image. And I think what makes that footage so chilling is the context, right?
Right.
Because that wasn't a meticulously designed movie set in Hollywood.
No, not at all.
And it wasn't a war zone halfway across the world. It was an abandoned, overgrown sugar town right here in the United States.
Yeah, which is just wild to think about. That horrific, chaotic spectacle was beamed into millions of living rooms. It was the explosive climax of a story that completely gripped the nation at the time.
It really did.
But, we are not here today to just recount the explosions or reread the breaking news banners.
No, we've got a much deeper mission today.
Exactly. A much more troubling mission, really. We are looking at a stack of incredibly detailed excerpts from an investigative account titled San Aurelio.
Such a fascinating read.
It is. And the central mystery we are going to unravel for you, the listener, because we know you are the kind of person who wants the actual truth behind the deafening noise, right? The question is this.
Go for it.
How did a small group of people who just a couple of years earlier were bartering jars of honey and, homemade goat cheese at a local farmer's market become the target of a massive federal siege and a national media circus?
That really is the defining question, because the story of San Aurelio is not simply a true crime recounting of a raid.
Right.
It's an absolute masterclass in a profound, fatal societal disconnect. We are going to examine the tragic chasm between lived reality, like what was actually happening on the ground, in the dirt, day by day, and external perception.
Which are two very different things.
Completely different. And specifically, we're going to look at how mainstream media systems function as the engine driving that wedge.
Okay, so to do this right, we're going to kind of split our lenses for this deep dive. I'm going to plant myself firmly on the inside.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, I want to look at the gritty, sweaty, desperately human reality of the people who actually built this place out of the mud. The blisters, the arguments, the daily survival stuff.
And I will analyze the outside. I'll look at the relentless machinery of media narratives, the bureaucratic echo chambers of Washington.
The suits.
Exactly, the suits. And the exact mechanisms by which public perception is manufactured, syndicated, and eventually weaponized. Because what this source material reveals in painstaking detail is that the destruction of San Aurelio began long before the first armored vehicle arrived. It began with words.
It always starts with words, doesn't it? But before we can even begin to understand how the media distorted San Aurelio, we have to establish the baseline reality.
Right, we need the foundation.
Yeah, we have to strip away the headlines and look at the seed of what this place actually was. We need to know who these people were when they were just individuals, long before they were painted as a monolithic threat.
And that seed was planted by a genuinely fascinating constellation of misfits. I mean, they were not a prepackaged ideological organization.
No, not at all.
They were just this patchwork of disparate individuals who had all, in their own unique ways, violently collided with the friction of modern bureaucratic systems.
Right. They all had their own beef with the system. And the catalyst for all of this, the person who really starts it, is a woman named Sarah Whitfield.
Oh, Sarah's such a compelling figure.
She really is. And if you read the later media reports, you would think she was some hardened, radical, militant commander.
Right, like some cartel boss or something.
Exactly. But the reality, she was a farmer. The text details her life back in Virginia. She had this small farm, growing heirloom tomatoes, selling raw milk, running a really modest local operation.
Sounds pretty peaceful, honestly.
It does. But she ended up having her greenhouses literally bulldozed by state environmental inspectors. And it wasn't because her food was toxic or anything.
Wait, really? Bulldozed?
Literally bulldozed.
Yeah.
And it was all over an incredibly dense web of zoning and permit disputes.
Ah, red tape. The official narrative drafted by the local county at the time claimed her structures were unregulated agricultural facilities that posed theoretical health risks.
Theoretical being the key word there.
Exactly. But Sarah's perspective, which she actually voiced to a local reporter while she was literally standing in the mud of her ruined livelihood, that provides the crucial psychological baseline for everything that follows.
Yeah, what did she say?
She said it was never about public health. She argued it was entirely about control. She believed the system simply could not tolerate a citizen who could feed herself and her neighbors without asking for permission.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, without paying the requisite fees, without submitting to the administrative state.
I mean, you can kind of see her point, right? She didn't want to wage a war against the government. She just wanted to step entirely outside of its reach, which is a completely different motivation than wanting to fight them. So she leaves Virginia, heads south to Florida, and starts selling hot peppers and herbs at a local farmer's market just to survive.
Starting over from scratch.
Exactly. And this is where the web of San Aurelio starts to connect. Because at this market, she meets a guy named Ethan.
Ah, Ethan.
Yeah. And Ethan's backstory is entirely different. But the emotional through line, that feeling of being chewed up by the system, is identical.
Right.
He is an ex-infantry soldier. He did 18 years in the Army. 18 years.
Bit of all time.
He did his tours in the sandbox, survived, came home, and realized he fundamentally did not fit into the corporate bureaucratic world waiting for him.
Yeah, Ethan's internal monologue, as captured in the source text interviews with his family members, is deeply revealing.
What was going through his head?
He felt a profound sense of disillusionment. He felt like he had spent the best years of his life watching the military machine act as an armed guard for corporate contracts overseas.
Oh, that's heavy.
It is. And when he returned, he was basically expected to sit in a cubicle and pretend that mattered.
Right, like just blend back in.
Yeah, he was looking for something tangible. He wanted a place where he could defend what was actually his, rather than what belonged to a defense contractor.
Man. And what I found so compelling about Ethan is that he didn't join Sarah's crazy farm idea because he thought it was a guaranteed success.
No, not at all.
He joined because, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, he actually wanted something to work. You know, he was starved for purpose outside of a broken system.
That makes total sense.
And then into this mix walks Gabo, Gabriel Martinez Perez.
Gabo is perhaps the most ideologically vital member of the founders.
Yeah, tell us about Gabo.
He is a Cuban immigrant and a preacher. The text notes he grew up in Matanzas and worked in Varadero.
Okay.
Varadero is a resort town, and there, Gabo saw the starkest possible juxtaposition of power and poverty.
I can imagine.
He saw high-ranking party elites drinking imported champagne and eating delicacies, while ordinary Cubans, like his own friends and family, waited in block-long lines just to get basic rations of bread.
That kind of hypocrisy just burns itself into your soul. You don't forget that.
No, you don't. Gabo took that experience and wove his deep religious faith and his absolute demand for personal freedom into one single inseparable message.
Wow.
He preached that no government, no matter how righteous it claims to be, should ever possess the authority to put itself between a man and his own conscience.
I mean, that is powerful stuff.
It really is.
Yeah.
Gabo provides the ethical and rhetorical anchor for what San Aurelio would become.
Yeah.
He is the one who famously articulated their core philosophy over drinks one night. He said, "You don't need to hide if you have done nothing wrong. You just need to make it so they can't touch you."
Oh, that is a massive distinction. The foundation of San Aurelio was never about concealment or like scurrying around in the dark. It was about building a parallel independence out in the open. But if you are going to build a parallel independence in the 21st century, you need someone who understands the modern invisible infrastructure.
You definitely do. And enter Marcus Lee.
Marcus.
Marcus is this young, brilliant Bay Area tech kid, barely in his early 20s. He's basically walking around with a laptop bag full of crypto hardware.
Naturally.
And he is obsessed with building what he calls a mesh of trust.
Okay, it is worth pausing here to explain exactly what Marcus was trying to build.
Yeah.
Because it becomes a massive point of contention later on.
Right, the tech stuff can get a little dense.
Yeah, so for the listener, when most of us use the internet, our data travels through centralized hubs, right?
Massive server farms.
Exactly. Massive server farms controlled by mega corporations and
Yeah.
easily monitored by telecommunications authorities. But a mesh network, which is what Marcus was designing, bypasses that entirely.
It's totally decentralized.
Right. It is a peer-to-peer network where each user's computer or device connects directly to the others, just bouncing the signal along locally.
So there's no middleman.
Exactly. There is no central hub to shut down, and there is no central authority to monitor the traffic. It is an infrastructure of pure decentralization.
It's basically the digital equivalent of growing your own tomatoes.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Yes. You don't need the supermarket. And Marcus believed you shouldn't need the telecom giants.
Right.
So look at this incredible juxtaposition of people here. You have an agrarian tomato farmer, a disillusioned combat veteran, a fiery Cuban preacher, and a Silicon Valley software engineer.
And we cannot forget Jack Doyle.
Man, Jack.
Jack is the quintessential tinfoil hat trucker. He is a man obsessed with the macroeconomic collapse of civilizations.
Jack is fascinating. He's the guy who will corner you at a diner and talk for 3 hours about how fiat currency is a mathematical illusion.
We all know a Jack.
We do.
Mm.
And for anyone who hasn't been cornered by a Jack recently, fiat currency is essentially what we use every day, right? The US dollar, the euro.
Right.
It's money that has value purely because a government decrees it has value, not because it's backed by a physical commodity like gold or silver.
Yeah, and Jack's absolute terror was that governments would just print endless amounts of this paper, inflating it until a loaf of bread cost a wheelbarrow full of cash.
Like historical hyperinflation.
Exactly. He genuinely believed the collapse was imminent, and his mantra was that when the paper burns, the only things that will matter are hard assets.
Oh, man.
Gold, land, and friends who know how to use rifles.
Wow. Okay, so rounding up this core group is Daniel Herrera.
Right, Daniel.
Daniel is a soft-spoken Christian libertarian and a master builder. His entire family construction business had been absolutely gutted by the 2008 housing crash.
True.
He had played by the rules, trusted the banks, and lost everything.
Yeah.
So for Daniel, building a new debt-free community out of the swamp wasn't just a physical project, right? It was fulfilling a kind of divine covenant.
That is a powerful motivator. So this is the crew: a farmer, a soldier, a preacher, a coder, a trucker, and a builder.
Sounds like the start of a joke, honestly.
It really does. But they convene at a roadside dive bar called the Red Dog on Highway 27.
Oh, I can picture it.
It's exactly the kind of place you're picturing. Cinder block walls, buzzing neon beer signs, cash only, peanut shells on the floor.
The classic dive.
Yeah. And Sarah spreads these crinkled paper county plat maps across a sticky table. She points to an abandoned former Spanish sugarcane settlement called San Aurelio.
Yeah.
It is a literal ghost town. The sugar mill shut down decades ago, and half the parcels have no listed owner because they are tied up in ancient foreclosures, bankruptcies, and forgotten deeds.
Just totally abandoned.
Completely. And Sarah proposes a wild legal maneuver. She wants to use the laws of adverse possession to legally claim the land.
Okay, adverse possession. This is a fascinating and I think often misunderstood legal doctrine.
Oh, absolutely.
People colloquially call it squatters' rights.
Yeah.
But it is much more complex than just, pitching a tent on someone else's lawn.
Right, you can't just move into someone's backyard.
Exactly. Historically, the law abhors land going to waste. If property is abandoned and a new party moves in, openly occupies the land, actively improves it, and pays the delinquent property taxes for a continuous statutory period, which varies by state, obviously, they can eventually petition the court for a quiet title, making them the legal owners.
It's actually pretty brilliant.
It is. Sarah wasn't suggesting they steal land. She was suggesting they legally resurrect dead land.
It is brilliant, but the physical reality of what they were proposing is just staggering.
Oh, yeah.
It makes me think of all those sanitized mythological stories of Silicon Valley startups. You know the ones?
Oh, yeah. The founders in a cool Palo Alto garage, drinking craft coffee, eating ramen, writing code late into the night.
Exactly. It's romantic. But the San Aurelio founders, their garage was a hostile, overgrown Florida swamp.
Yikes.
They drive out to these coordinates, and there is nothing but dense palmetto scrub, sinkholes, mosquitoes the size of small birds, and the rotting, roofless frames of old sugar worker cabins.
I mean, the transition from the theoretical debates in the air-conditioned dive bar to the brutal physical reality of the swamp, that is the crucible of San Aurelio right there.
Definitely.
The journalist notes from a woman named Rachel Kim, who documented the early days, are incredibly evocative. She wrote that the rhythm of hammers became their only hymn.
That's a beautiful line.
Isn't it? There was no grand political manifesto being drafted in those first months. There was only grueling, mundane labor. People showed up with a backpack, grabbed a hammer, and started working.
I can barely put together a prefabricated bookshelf in my living room without losing my mind.
Right. Same here.
These people were out there in 100-degree heat with 90% humidity, clearing brush with machetes, tearing up rotted floorboards, and trying to repair rusted hand-crank water pumps just so they could drink.
It's exhausting just thinking about it. They built bee boxes for honey. They traded raw goat's milk to a mechanic a few towns over in exchange for a salvaged alternator.
Pure survival?
Yeah. And because they fundamentally distrusted the dollar, thanks to Jack, they started using junk silver coins, like pre-1965 dimes and quarters that still had actual silver content, to barter amongst themselves.
Right.
It was an incredibly fragile, exhausting existence.
And this, I think, is the critical insight we must extract from those early days. Their initial strength was entirely physical, not ideological.
Okay, unpack that a little.
Well, as they succeeded in surviving, as they successfully built out an off-grid economy that genuinely did not rely on the established financial or municipal systems, they achieved something that terrified the outside world.
Which was?
They became independent, and more importantly, they did it openly.
Right, Gabo's philosophy, out in the open.
Exactly. When a group of people builds a parallel system and refuses to hide, they become unreadable to outside institutions. And to a sprawling bureaucracy, an entity that is unreadable is inherently categorized as dangerous.
The bureaucracy doesn't know what box to check, so it panics.
Precisely.
Which brings us to a massive turning point in our narrative. Because the reality was sweat, dirt, and silver dimes. But as the town began to stabilize and grow, word inevitably leaked out.
You can't keep a secret like that forever.
Right, you can't have a few dozen people rebuilding a ghost town without someone noticing. And this is where we witnessed the very first fatal fracture between reality and perception. We start seeing the birth of the myth.
Yeah, and to understand the myth, we first have to look at the immediate reality of their neighbors.
How do the locals see them?
Well, the source material is remarkably clear about how the locals in the adjacent towns, places like Immokalee and LaBelle, initially perceived the residents of San Aurelio. When these people came into town, they weren't wearing tactical gear. They were wearing muddy boots and sunburns.
The locals actually liked them. I mean, a retired hardware store owner was interviewed, and he said they were just like regular country folk trying to make do.
High praise in that part of the world.
Definitely. They would come in, buy bulk supplies like nails, flour, and seed, and they always paid in cash or silver. A local AM radio host even did a lighthearted segment praising their heirloom tomatoes and mentioning that Sarah had given him fantastic tips on composting.
That's almost quaint.
It is. There's even a documented story where a handful of San Aurelio men spent a weekend fixing a local elderly man's roof for free because a hurricane had ripped off the shingles and his insurance wouldn't cover it.
So they were good neighbors.
Yeah. To the people who actually interacted with them face-to-face, who shared the same physical space, they were just eccentric neighbors trying to live a quiet, difficult life.
But perception radically distorts the further away you get from the physical reality.
Oh.
The first shadows fall on San Aurelio, not from the neighbors, but from the media looking for content. It begins innocuously enough with a syndicated newspaper column.
Okay, I want to break down how that syndication actually works, because it's not like a massive national news crew just parachuted into the swamp on day one.
Right, it's a process.
How does a quiet local story suddenly become national news?
It is the mechanics of the modern newswire. So a freelance stringer or a local reporter writes a slightly quirky human interest piece about the folks living off the grid. That story gets picked up by a regional wire service. Then an editor in a distant city, say Atlanta or New York, who has never been to Florida and has never met Sarah or Ethan, sees the story on the wire.
And they need clicks.
They need clicks, they need engagement, so they change the headline.
Of course they do.
The original local story might have been titled Off-Grid Community Revives Old Sugar Town, but the syndicated version runs with the headline Modern-Day Prospectors or Tax-Dodging Cult.
Oh, wow. And just like that, the word cult is injected into the national bloodstream?
Yeah.
It's like a drop of ink in a glass of water, you know? It just colors everything that comes after it.
Precisely. This begins the systematic weaponization of the ordinary. The media machinery takes the mundane, practical realities of life in San Aurelio and maliciously reframes them through a lens of suspicion and threat.
The source text gives us absolutely chilling examples of this reframing.
Let's hear them.
Let's look at Ethan again. Reality. Ethan is an ex-soldier living in a swamp filled with feral hogs, venomous snakes, and desperate people.
It's not a safe place.
No. And San Aurelio had already experienced incidents where prowlers tried to sneak into the camp at night to steal their silver. So Ethan does the logical thing.
Which is?
He sets up a berm, and he starts teaching the women and the teenagers basic firearm safety and self-defense. He wants them to be able to protect themselves when he's not around.
Makes total sense.
Perception. A cable news producer finds out about this, and suddenly those self-defense lessons are broadcast nationally as paramilitary training camps.
Wow, just a complete twist of reality. And we see the exact same distortion with their economy.
The silver dimes.
Exactly. Reality. They are using junk silver coins and bartering jars of honey to trade amongst themselves because Jack Doyle convinced them fiat currency is unstable and they philosophically want to hold hard assets.
Right, it's basically a localized barter system as old as human civilization.
Exactly. But perception. Think tanks and government officials, quoted in prominent news magazines, label this a shadow economy, a parallel financial system designed to subvert the state, and evidence of massive underground wealth.
Which leads us to the absolute turning point in the media narrative, the most absurd, damaging lie of all.
Oh, the vault.
The vault rumor. The text explains that fringe blogs and local gossip started whispering that San Aurelio wasn't just trading silver dimes.
What were they saying?
The rumor was that they had constructed a massive subterranean gold vault.
Like a bank vault.
A literal, cartoonish bank vault door buried deep in the Florida swamp, holding millions in untaxed bullion.
And to be entirely clear, the investigative text confirms there was zero proof of this.
Zero.
None. It was a complete fabrication.
But the mainstream media doesn't care about proof when the visual is that good. I mean, late-night cable news shows start running segments featuring glossy, 3D-rendered graphics of a gleaming vault door stamped with a giant question mark and the words, "The San Aurelio Hoard."
It's just wild. This rumor fundamentally alters the public's understanding. It transforms them from eccentric, muddy farmers into a powerful, secretive organization hoarding illicit wealth.
Okay, wait, I have to play devil's advocate here, because if I'm a listener, I'm thinking, these people are hoarding silver, they are carrying rifles, they are openly rejecting the U.S. dollar, and they are utilizing obscure legal loopholes to take land.
Fair points.
Right, isn't the government totally justified in viewing them as a dangerous shadow economy? Aren't they technically breaking the law? I mean, why did the media even need to invent a secret vault when the reality is already pretty radical?
That is the perfect question, and it strikes at the heart of how state power and media narratives interact.
How so?
Were they utilizing obscure loopholes like adverse possession? Yes, but adverse possession is a legal statute, not a crime.
Okay, true.
Were they bartering in silver? Yes, but barter is legal, provided you navigate the complex tax implications.
Right. People barter all the time.
The problem is that the media, and by extension the public, abhors a vacuum of motive. The actual reality, which is basically, we are engaging in complex legal maneuvers and grueling physical labor simply to be left alone, that does not fit standard societal templates.
It's too boring.
It doesn't generate ratings, and it doesn't easily justify a massive federal response.
It's too nuanced. You can't put complex legal maneuver on a chyron at the bottom of the screen.
Exactly. If a group's motives don't fit recognizable templates like criminal enterprise, greed, or domestic terrorism, the media struggles to explain them.
So they just make one up.
The vault provides the missing MacGuffin. It provides motive. A secret underground vault of untaxed gold turns a philosophical agrarian experiment into a tangible, recognizable threat.
It gives them a villain.
It gives the audience a villain, and it gives the state the moral authority it needs to intervene. The state interprets unreadable and independent as illegal, but they need the media to sell that interpretation to the public.
Which brings the full weight of Washington down on their heads. Because once that vault rumor legitimized the media's rabid interest, the narrative shifted permanently from a local quirk to a national security threat.
And that forced the bureaucratic machinery to escalate.
We see a very distinct, deliberate shift in the language used by the press and elected officials.
How did the language change?
The source text notes that within a span of 3 months, words like eccentrics and homesteaders completely vanished from the reporting.
Replaced by what?
The new lexicon relied entirely on terms like extremists, radicals, anti-tax separatists, and dangerous militant cult.
That is a massive shift.
It really is. This is not just a semantic evolution. It is a deliberate rhetorical escalation designed to set the stage for physical escalation.
It creates this terrifying bureaucratic echo chamber.
Yeah, I want you to imagine it like an autoimmune disease, right?
Okay, I'm following.
The human body, in this case the nation, detects a foreign object. San Aurelio is just a harmless splinter, a group of people growing tomatoes and trading silver. But the immune system, meaning the media and the government, misidentifies it as a lethal virus. So it triggers this massive, overwhelming inflammatory response. And that response ends up doing far more damage than the splinter ever could.
That is a highly accurate mechanical metaphor. The government reacts to the media's inflamed reporting, and the media in turn amplifies the government's reaction.
It feeds itself.
We start seeing congressional committees in Washington holding hearings, the Energy and Commerce Committee, Homeland Security, the Ways and Means Committee. Politicians are on camera, grandstanding, warning their constituents about an alternative economy operating on U.S. soil.
You have IRS commissioners giving stern, tight-lipped press conferences declaring tax evasion is not freedom.
Right.
You have ATF officials hinting darkly at unauthorized, heavily armed militias. But the most chilling part of the source material are the internal FOIA documents, the Freedom of Information Act memos that the author uncovered.
Yes, the internal communications reveal the true anxiety of the state.
What were they actually worried about?
Behind closed doors, they aren't worried about the mythical gold vault. They are worried about the philosophy. In these memos, bureaucrats are describing San Aurelio not as a criminal enterprise, but as an economic contagion and a precedent danger.
A precedent danger.
Yes. One prominent senator is quoted in a transcribed closed-door meeting saying, "If they succeed, even for 5 years, we'll have 10 more San Aurelios spring up like mushrooms across the Sun Belt. The precedent is the threat, not their guns or their gardens."
Which proves Sarah Whitfield was absolutely right from day one.
She called it.
When her greenhouses were bulldozed in Virginia, she said it was about control. And here's a U.S. senator explicitly stating that the mere example of their independence is the threat.
Unbelievable.
But you can't send armored vehicles to crush an idea. You need a spark. You need a specific physical event to justify moving in.
Right. The inciting incident.
And this is where we get to the delivery truck pretext.
This incident is the tragic turning point, where the disconnect between reality and perception becomes actively, physically dangerous.
According to the text, a commercial delivery driver is hauling hardware on a secondary dirt road a few miles west of the San Aurelio perimeter. It's dusk. Visibility is low.
Okay.
The driver claims that 2 unidentified men carrying rifles stepped into the road and signaled him to halt.
Did he stop?
No. The driver panics, slams on the gas, swerves around them, and drives off. No shots are fired. No one is injured. No cargo is stolen.
So basically nothing happened.
Basically, and most importantly, there is absolutely zero forensic or investigative proof that these men had anything whatsoever to do with San Aurelio.
They could have been anyone.
Exactly. They could have been local hunters. They could have been poachers. The local sheriff's report literally lists the suspects as unknown.
But the truth of the sheriff's report is irrelevant to the machinery. The media spin is instantaneous and overwhelming.
How did they spin it?
Regional news stations immediately tie the incident to the community. Within hours, national outlets are running breaking news banners reading, "Tax-dodging sect accused of blocking interstate commerce."
Oh my God. And here is how the media manufactures a visual reality that doesn't exist. They don't have footage of the incident because there is none.
Right, it was just a guy on a dirt road.
So the cable news producers pull unrelated stock footage of anonymous armed men in camouflage walking through the woods, and they loop that footage on screen while the anchor talks about San Aurelio.
Visual manipulation.
Totally. The viewer's brain automatically links the terrifying image to the community.
Meanwhile, while the public is absorbing this manufactured crisis, the government seizes the opportunity. A declassified FOIA document reveals that a high-ranking Justice Department official was handed that inconclusive local sheriff's report.
The one that said the suspects were unknown.
Yes. In the margins of the report, the official scrawled a handwritten note. "This is the pretext we need. Escalate."
It's Kafkaesque. I mean, I want you, listening right now, to imagine this happening to you. You are sitting in your living room. You spent all day weeding your garden, maybe fixing a leak in your roof.
Normal, everyday stuff.
You are exhausted, you haven't done anything wrong, and you turn on a battery-powered radio only to hear a national news anchor soberly announcing that you and your friends have supposedly ambushed a commercial truck and set up a paramilitary blockade.
It is a reality completely divorced from your own.
Completely.
It is the ultimate feedback loop of optics. The media creates a crisis, the paramilitary ambush, and broadcasts it nationally.
Right.
The public, reacting to the terrifying broadcast, demands their elected officials do something. The government, perpetually fearful of looking weak or inactive in the face of a perceived public threat, uses the media's fabricated crisis as the exact political cover they need to execute real-world violence.
So the truth doesn't even factor in.
The truth of the delivery trick doesn't matter anymore. The political utility of the story is all that counts.
And that feedback loop didn't just stay on the television screens or in the marble halls of Washington. It physically reached down and altered the lived reality inside San Aurelio.
It changed everything for them.
It created a horrific, self-fulfilling prophecy.
We begin to see a profound, suffocating, chilling effect on the community. The text describes how the mounting pressure outside literally changed the air inside.
How so?
Supply routes were suddenly cut. The locals from Immokalee who used to bring them fuel or trade for food were stopped by newly established federal checkpoints on the county roads.
Wow, so they were really isolated.
They were threatened with losing their commercial trucking licenses if they did business with the extremists.
The government essentially puts them under a medieval siege. Helicopters start making low daily passes over the camp. The rotors kick up massive clouds of dust that coat the tomato plants and terrify the children.
Psychological warfare, basically.
Yeah, they literally force these people into the dark. The community started living in shadows.
Rachel Kim's journals from this period are heartbreaking. She describes them abandoning the generator because they couldn't get fuel.
So no power.
No power. They start using improvised kerosene lamps in the communal meeting hall at night, keeping the flames low to avoid detection from the air. They cut wicks from old cotton shirts.
Oh, man.
She wrote, "We smelled like we lived in another century. Families started whispering at night, even in their own cabins. They felt hunted."
And when human beings feel hunted, a siege mentality is inevitable. Marcus, the tech kid, he stops writing code and spends his nights frantically trying to reroute basic medical supplies through encrypted channels. Sarah is making anxious inventories of missing antibiotics.
They're prepping for the worst.
And Ethan's rifle range, the one that the media called a paramilitary camp, it gets a lot fuller.
I bet it did.
The women and teenagers who previously just wanted to learn how to scare off a feral hog are now out there learning how to load and fire under pressure, preparing to stand watch on the perimeter.
It is the tragedy of becoming what you are accused of being. The media spent months baselessly accusing San Aurelio of being a militant compound, a heavily armed fortress preparing for war.
Which they weren't.
But they weren't. They were farmers, a preacher, a coder, a trucker. But by treating them like a militant compound, by cutting off their food, freezing their assets, and circling them with military helicopters, the state and the media literally forced them to start acting like a militant compound simply to survive the week.
That is the most dangerous, destructive power of perception. When massive, powerful institutions treat you like an outlaw, your options basically evaporate.
You're backed into a corner.
You are left with a stark, brutal choice. You can either surrender your hard-won freedom and submit to a system you fundamentally reject, or you can pick up a rifle and become the exact outlaw they invented.
Right.
Rachel's journal captures this perfectly. She said, "For every nail we drove into the walls of San Aurelio, the outside world hammered back twice as hard. We pretended we were building a home, but really, we were building a fort."
They were trapped inside a narrative they didn't write, and the authors of that narrative were demanding a violent conclusion.
The tension finally snaps.
The narrative demands a climax, and the federal agencies provide it, with the media serving as the eager, live audience.
The arrival of the ATF is a masterclass in how rumors dictate reality. The text details the first wave of federal SUVs rolling up that rutted dirt road toward the perimeter, and the deeply tragic part is the psychological mindset of the internal agents driving those vehicles.
Yes, the source material contains interviews with retired agents who were on the ground that day.
What did they say?
These young officers were absolutely terrified.
Really, the federal agents were terrified.
Because they consumed the exact same media as the rest of the country. They had been reading the headlines about shadow economies, radical separatists, and the mythical underground gold vault.
Oh, of course.
They went in expecting an organized, heavily armed extremist militia ready to fight to the death to protect their hoard. One officer later testified, "You see the news, you get the briefing, you go in expecting Fallujah. I won't lie, my hands were shaking on the wheel."
So you have a powder keg. You have nervous, heavily armed government agents who have been told they are facing terrorists.
Right.
And on the other side of the perimeter, you have exhausted, paranoid, desperate homesteaders who have been starved out and hunted for months.
It's a recipe for disaster.
And right on cue, the media stage is set.
The spectacle is grotesque. The satellite trucks roll in, parking just behind the federal barricades. They set up massive stadium-style floodlights that paint the tree line in that blinding white light.
Making a show of it.
It becomes a 24-hour live feed of a standoff. The survivors later testified that the worst part of those final days was feeling like they were on stage.
Oh, how awful.
They could hear the hum of the helicopters. They could hear the reporters shouting sensationalized questions into microphones just a few hundred yards away, but none of those reporters were asking them questions.
Right. The media wasn't talking to them.
The media was just talking about them to the cameras, creating content. Meanwhile, on social media, hashtags are trending. The narrative is being consumed as entertainment in real time.
And then, the spark. And the source text is incredibly clear about this, and we need to report this exactly as the forensic evidence dictates.
Very important.
Nobody knows who fired the first shot. The records show a chaotic, highly tense environment. There is no definitive proof that a federal agent intentionally fired on a citizen, nor is there proof that a San Aurelio resident intentionally ambushed an agent.
So what likely happened?
The most exhaustive research suggests that a member of San Aurelio, exhausted and terrified, may have fired a weapon out of sheer paranoia or poor trigger discipline in the dark. A spark struck from within.
Which is entirely plausible given the stress.
When you put terrified people with guns up against terrified people with guns in the dark, tragedy isn't a possibility, it's a mathematical certainty.
Once the gunfire started, the government's response was overwhelming. The phrase the agencies used in their official after-action reports was final tactical resolution.
Final tactical resolution.
It is a chillingly antiseptic, bureaucratic term for absolute horror.
The reality of that resolution is the image we opened the deep dive with. Armored vehicles breaching the perimeter, treads crushing civilian vehicles into the mud. And then, the fire.
The fire.
The old wooden post office, the strongest building in the town where the families and children had been moved to shelter, catches fire. It burns to the ground.
Horrific.
The government documents use words like gas deployment and ignition source unknown. They classify it as a tragic accident. But the visceral reality, as remembered by the survivors who watched it happen, was the smell of military tear gas, the overwhelming stench of kerosene clinging to their clothes, and the screams of the people trapped inside.
The physical town of San Aurelio ceased to exist that day. It was reduced to ash, twisted metal, and government statistics.
It's just gone.
But the battle over its perception, the war of the narrative, was far from over. The physical destruction merely shifted the battlefield from the Florida swamp to the courts and the internet.
Right. The town is destroyed, but the machinery doesn't stop. The government immediately convenes the Special Commission on the San Aurelio incident.
And as the author meticulously documents, the commission was largely an exercise in institutional optics.
So a whitewash.
Exactly. It was a whitewash designed to protect the agencies involved and reassure the public that the state's monopoly on violence was justified.
What did they conclude?
The findings were depressingly predictable. They found no deliberate wrongdoing by federal agents, the deployment of armored vehicles was within operational protocol, and the fire that killed the residents was an unintended consequence of non-lethal gas interacting with the community's own kerosene lamps.
Blaming the victims, essentially.
The language was carefully constructed to paint the destruction of an entire community as a regrettable but necessary operational accident.
And while the commission is writing these antiseptic reports to protect the agencies, the actual human beings who survived the fire are being paraded into federal courtrooms in orange jumpsuits.
The aftermath is brutal.
The trial of narratives begins. And I want to explain exactly how they prosecuted them, because it's infuriating. The government utilized a legal doctrine called the felony murder rule.
Yes, the felony murder rule.
Can you explain how that works?
The felony murder rule essentially dictates that if a death occurs during the commission of a dangerous felony, even if you did not pull the trigger, even if you did not intend for anyone to die, even if the death was accidental, everyone involved in the conspiracy is guilty of murder.
So Sarah Whitfield, the woman who just wanted to grow heirloom tomatoes and drink raw milk, the woman who was nowhere near the gunfire when it started, is charged under this rule.
It's a very broad net.
She is sentenced to 25 years in federal prison.
25 years.
She dies behind bars. Marcus, the brilliant young tech coder, has his complex blogs about privacy and decentralized networks read aloud in court, reframed by prosecutors as manifestos of a conspiratorial anti-government mindset. He goes to prison.
For writing code and blogging.
And Jack Doyle, the trucker who feared fiat currency. He slips into the swamp during the chaos and vanishes. He becomes a literal ghost.
The trial was never about achieving justice in the traditional sense of determining exact individual culpability.
No, it was theater.
It was about the government permanently cementing its story into the historical record. It was about proving to the frightened public that the state was absolutely right to intervene, that these people were dangerous extremists, and that the vault, metaphorically if not literally, was real.
But the internet doesn't let things die that easily.
Yeah.
The text outlines how the memory of San Aurelio lives on today, completely fractured into two wildly divergent myths.
Yes, the perception completely split. In the mainstream, authoritative view, like the view taught in security seminars and cited in news retrospectives, San Aurelio remains a grim, cautionary tale.
Right.
It is framed as the ultimate story of tax-dodging, armed fanatics who prove that unchecked freedom inevitably leads to chaos, cultism, and violence. It is utilized continuously as a justification for stricter domestic surveillance and tighter regulations on alternative financial networks.
But if you venture into the fringe, the libertarian forums, the crypto-anarchist subreddits, San Aurelio is a sacred wound.
A completely different narrative.
It is a martyred utopia. In those circles, they believe San Aurelio was crushed, not because it was failing or because it was dangerous, but because it was succeeding.
Interesting perspective.
They think it proved, even for a brief, muddy moment, that people could live, trade, and survive without the state. You can literally go online right now and buy black t-shirts that say, "Remember San Aurelio," in bold white letters.
So we have to synthesize all of this. The physical town has been entirely reclaimed by the Florida palmettos. The dirt roads are gone. The ashes have washed away. But the ghost town lives on in endless Reddit threads and Twitter debates.
So what is the ultimate takeaway here?
What do you think is the core lesson from this investigative account?
Well, I think it shows us that history isn't just written by the victors. History is written by whoever controls the narrative machinery. And it's kept alive by those who refuse to forget.
That's a good way to put it.
But the absolute soul-crushing tragedy of this entire deep dive is that the actual human beings, Sarah the farmer, Gubbo the preacher, Ethan the soldier, Daniel the builder, Marcus the coder, they get completely lost in the noise.
I stopped being people.
They are stripped of their humanity. They become flat symbols, two-dimensional characters in a morality play written by the media and directed by the government.
Precisely. The tragedy of San Aurelio was born of a massive, unbridgeable disconnect. You had the lived reality of ordinary, flawed people trying to build something new with their bare hands, relying on sweat and silver dyeings.
Just trying to get by.
And you had a media and government machine that is structurally, fundamentally incapable of perceiving that kind of radical independence as anything other than a threat that must be eradicated. The machine couldn't see the garden, it could only see the vault.
The vault versus the garden. I love that. And that ultimately is what we want you to take away from this deep dive. We all consume media narratives every single day.
We swim in it.
We do. We scroll through our feeds, we read the breaking news banners, we absorb the heavily edited clips on social media. We are constantly being fed a manufactured reality. How often are we being shown the vault instead of the garden?
It's a question we should constantly be asking.
How often is the ordinary, mundane reality of someone's life being weaponized by a producer in a distant city to manufacture a villain for us to hate?
It is an essential daily exercise in critical thinking to question the framing, the adjectives, and the underlying assumptions of the stories we are handed by institutional authorities.
So I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over as you go about your day. We spent an hour talking about how the media twisted Ethan's practical gun safety lessons into paramilitary training, right? And how they warped Marcus's privacy code into a terrorist conspiracy. I want you to imagine if that massive, relentless media machine were to put a magnifying glass over your life today.
Oh, it's a scary thought.
Think about your private group chats with your friends. Think about your unusual hobbies, your deepest political or religious beliefs, the sarcastic things you vent about after a long, frustrating day at work.
Out of context, it could look very bad.
Exactly. If a well-funded institution decided tomorrow that you were the enemy, how easily could the mundane, innocent details of your reality be stitched together to form the perception of a monster?
It is a terrifyingly easy process once the narrative machinery turns its gears toward you. The context is stripped away, and only the threat remains.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this look into the tragedy of San Aurelio encourages you to look a little closer and deeply question the narratives you read tomorrow.
Thanks for listening.
Because remember, you never truly know when you are looking at the reality of a rusted pickup truck and when you are just watching the spectacle of a tank crushing it into the mud.